The Valorian collective ruled over many star systems. They were tall beings with blue skin and 4 arms. Their ships were huge and shaped like arrowheads. For 100 years they had taken over planet after planet, not with bombs or lasers, but with something much more powerful, their mind control beam. Commander Zixaloth stood on the bridge of the biggest Valorian ship. He was older than most Valorians, with darker blue skin and scars across his face. He looked at the large screen, showing a new planet they had found, Earth. "This will be easy," Zixaloth said to his second-in-command. "These humans look even weaker than the last species we conquered." The Valorians had used their special weapon, the Cerebral Compliance Ray, CCR, on 17 different alien species. Each time it worked perfectly. The CCR sent special waves that took over the brains of any living thing. Once hit by the beam, creatures would stop fighting and do whatever the Valorians told them to do. "Set course for Earth," Zixaloth ordered. "We will arrive in 3 days." On Earth, no one knew what was coming. People went about their normal lives. Kids went to school, adults went to work. No one looked up at the stars and worried about aliens, except for one person. Diane Miller worked at a space research center in Nevada. She was 35 years old with short brown hair. She had spent 10 years looking for signs of life in space. That night, she saw something unusual on her screens. "That can't be right," she said to herself. She adjusted some settings and looked again. The readings were the same. Something very large was moving toward Earth, and it was moving fast. Diane picked up her phone and called her friend Frank Wells. Frank worked for the government and dealt with unusual threats. "Frank, you need to see this," Diane said. "I think we're about to have visitors." Frank arrived an hour later. He looked at Diane's screens and his face turned pale. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Maybe 24 hours, Diane answered. "Whatever. It is. It's big and it's coming straight for us." Frank made some calls. Soon, important people from around the world were meeting to discuss what to do. Some wanted to prepare weapons. Others wanted to try to talk to the aliens. In the end, they decided to wait and see what happened. They didn't have much choice. The next day, the Valorian ships appeared in the sky above every major city on Earth. They were massive, blocking out the sun in some places. People stopped what they were doing and looked up. Some ran in fear. Others took pictures with their phones. News reports showed the ships all over the world. In New York City, police officer Sam Green tried to keep people calm as they looked up at the huge ship hovering over Times Square. "Please stay back," he shouted to the crowd. "We don't know what's happening yet." A woman in the crowd pointed up. "Look, something's happening." The bottom of the ship was opening up. A green light started to shine down on the city. The same thing was happening all over the world. Green light from the Valorian ships bathed the Earth. On the main Valorian ship, Commander Zixaloth watched with satisfaction. The CCR was at full power. In a few moments, all humans would be under Valorian control. "Begin the standard greeting," he ordered. A voice boomed from the ship, speaking in perfect English and every other human language at the same time. "People of Earth, we are the Valorian Collective. You are now under our protection and control. You will feel no pain. You will know no fear. You will serve the Collective." Zixaloth waited for the familiar sight of the humans stopping whatever they were doing and standing still, their eyes empty, their minds no longer their own. That's what had happened on every other world. But something was wrong. The humans weren't stopping. They were still running, still taking pictures, still looking up with fear and wonder in their eyes. "Increase power to the CCR," Zixaloth ordered. The green light got brighter. The Valorian voice repeated its message. But still, nothing changed. In a small lab in Washington, D.C., scientist Olivia Murphy was looking at brain scans. When the green light appeared, she had quickly set up equipment to measure its effects. What she saw amazed her. "The light is definitely trying to affect our brains," she said to her assistant. "But something in our minds is fighting it off." Back on the Valorian ship, Zixaloth was getting angry. "Why isn't it working?" he shouted. "Scan their brains again." A younger Valorian worked at a control panel. "Sir, the humans' brains are different from any species we've seen before. Their thought patterns are chaotic." Zixaloth looked at the screen showing human brain activity. Unlike the neat, organized patterns they had seen in other species, human thoughts jumped around, followed strange paths, and seemed to contradict themselves. How can they function like this? Zixlath wondered. Meanwhile, on a farm in Kansas, a small Valorian scout ship had landed. 4 aliens got out and began setting up equipment. They didn't notice Greg Dawson watching from behind his barn. Greg was a former soldier. He quietly went back to his house and called a number he hadn't used in years. "This is Dawson," he whispered. "We have 4 visitors on my property. I think they're setting up some kind of device." Within an hour, a team of soldiers arrived quietly at Greg's farm. Led by Captain Steve Rogers, they surrounded the aliens and their equipment. "Now!" Steve shouted. The soldiers jumped out with their weapons ready. The Valorians were caught by surprise. They tried to use small versions of the CCR on the soldiers, but just like the big version, it had no effect. "Don't move," Steve ordered the aliens. The Valorians looked at each other in confusion. This had never happened before. Their weapons always worked. Always. Meanwhile, all over the world, humans were organizing. The alien ships continued to shine. Their green light, but it did nothing. Government leaders met to discuss what to do. Military forces prepared for possible attack. On the main Valorian ship, Zixlath made a difficult decision. "Prepare for physical invasion," he ordered. "If we cannot control their minds, we will have to conquer them the old way." But as Valorian, troops prepared to land on Earth, reports came in about the captured scout team in Kansas. Humans had already taken Valorian prisoners in technology. For the first time in his long life, Zixlath felt fear. The CCR had always worked before. It was the perfect weapon. But somehow the human mind was different. Somehow humans were immune, and now they were preparing to fight back. Diane Miller looked at the Valorian ship above her research center. The green light was still shining down, still trying to take over her mind. But she felt nothing. "We need to learn everything we can about them," she said to Frank, who stood beside her. "If their mind control doesn't work on us, they might try something else next." Frank nodded. "The team in Kansas is bringing the captured aliens and their equipment to a secure facility. Maybe we can learn how their technology works." As night fell on the first day of the alien arrival, both sides prepared for what would come next. The Yao, Valorians, confused and frustrated that their perfect weapon had failed. The humans, afraid but determined to protect their world. And in labs across Earth, scientists like Olivia Murphy worked to understand why humans alone could resist the mind control beam. The answer would change everything. The next morning, people all over Earth woke up to the same view. Huge alien ships still hanging in the sky, still shining their green light down on cities and towns. But the fear from the first day was starting to change into something else. Curiosity and even anger. In the main Valorian ship above New York, Commander Zixlath slammed his fist on the control panel. For the first time in his 50 years as a commander, he didn't know what to do. The cerebral compliance ray had been on maximum power all night, yet the humans were still moving around freely, still thinking their own thoughts. "Sir," a young Valorian officer said, "we've received the report from the science team. They think they know why the CCR isn't working." Zixlath looked up. "Tell me." "Human brains are unusual. Their neural pathways don't follow normal patterns. They think in ways we've never seen before. Can we adjust the CCR to work on them?" The officer looked down. "The science team says no. Human thought patterns are too random, too contradictory. The CCR needs logical, consistent minds to control. Human minds are neither of those things." Zixlath growled with frustration. "Then we do this the hard way. Send down ground troops to capture some humans for study, and prepare the ships for conventional warfare." Down on Earth, the 4 Valorians captured in Kansas had been taken to a secret military base in Colorado. Greg Dawson had been asked to come along because of his military background and because he was the first to spot the aliens. At the base, scientists were studying the Valorians and their equipment. Dr. Olivia Murphy was leading the research team. She was in her late 30s with curly red hair and glasses. Right now she was looking at brain scans of one of the captured aliens. "Their minds are so orderly," she said to Greg, who was watching. "Every thought follows a clear, logical path. It's beautiful in a way, but also limited." Greg nodded. "Is that why their beam thing doesn't work on us?" "I think so," Olivia said. "Human brains are messy. We feel two things at once all the time. We believe contradictory things. We use logic but also intuition. Their mind control seems to need a more predictable target." In another room, engineers led by Paul Martinez were studying the small version of the CCR that the Valorians had been carrying. Paul was 30 years old with black hair and a thin beard. He had been working for NASA before being quickly brought onto this project. "This technology is amazing," Paul said to his team. "The way it generates the control beam is unlike anything we've ever built." Frank Wells stood nearby, arms crossed. "Can you figure out how it works?" Paul grinned. "Already have, mostly. It creates a specific frequency that resonates with brain tissue. The clever part is how it maps neural patterns and then overrides them, but it seems to need those patterns to be consistent to work properly." "Could we use it against them?" Frank asked. Paul thought for a moment. "Maybe, if we can reverse engineer it and tune it to their brain patterns instead of ours." "It's possible." Outside the base, more Valorian ships were entering Earth's atmosphere. These were smaller than the massive motherships, built for landing and deploying troops. They touched down in remote areas around the world. In a field outside Moscow, Valorian soldiers stepped onto Earth for the first time. They were tall and moved quickly, carrying weapons that fired pulses of energy. Russian military forces had surrounded the landing area. As soon as the aliens appeared, they opened fire. The same scene played out in Brazil, South Africa, Australia, and Canada. Humans fought back against the physical invasion since the mental one had failed. At the United Nations in New York, representatives from countries around the world met in an emergency session. They had one big advantage. They knew what the aliens were saying to each other. The Valorian communication system had been easy to hack since they had never needed to protect it before. Their mind control had always worked, so they never worried about resistance or espionage. "We need to coordinate our defense," said the Secretary General. "These Valorians have conquered many worlds, but always using their mind control technology. We may be the first species to actually fight back." Diane Miller had been brought to the UN meeting as an advisor. She stood to speak. "We've learned that the Valorians are sending down troops to capture humans for study. They want to figure out why their mind control doesn't work on us. We cannot let them take any prisoners." Back at the Colorado base, alarms suddenly went off. A Valorian ship had been detected approaching. "They found us," Frank said. "They must be tracking their missing scouts." Greg Dawson quickly organized the base's security forces. "We need to move the captured aliens and equipment deeper into the base." Olivia and Paul rushed to gather their research on the Valorian technology. Soldiers prepared defensive positions. The Valorian ship landed a mile from the base. 20 Valorian soldiers emerged and began moving toward the facility. "They're coming from the east," a soldier reported, heavily armed. Greg looked at Frank. "Our weapons worked on the 4 we captured. Let's hope they work on these ones too." The battle was short but intense. The Valorian weapons were more advanced, firing energy bolts that exploded on impact. But human bullets worked just fine against Valorian bodies. After 15 minutes of fighting, the attacking aliens retreated, leaving 7 of their dead behind. Olivia looked sadly at the alien bodies as they were brought into the base. "They didn't even try to negotiate. Why would they attack so directly?" "Because they're scared," Greg said. "Their one advantage didn't work on us, now they're panicking." Inside the base, Paul made an exciting discovery while studying the Valorian equipment. "I've found something," he called out. "The CCR doesn't just control minds. It's also how the Valorians communicate with each other at a deep level. It's like it creates a kind of group mind among them." Frank frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, they're all connected through this technology. They share thoughts, memories, even emotions. It's why they work so well together. And maybe why they're so confused by us. We're all separate individuals with our own thoughts. This discovery changed how the humans viewed the Valorians. They weren't just invaders. They were a single organism in many bodies, used to controlling other species and making them part of their collective mind. Around the world, humans continued to fight back against the Valorian ground forces. The aliens had better technology, but humans had numbers and determination. And most importantly, they had minds that couldn't be controlled. In New York, Sam Green was helping to organize civilians into support groups. Some were providing food and water to those who needed it. Others were watching the skies and reporting any movement from the Valorian ships. They thought they could just take over our minds, Sam said to a group of volunteers. They didn't count on humans being so stubborn. People laughed, finding humor even in this dangerous situation. That was another thing the Valorians didn't understand: human resilience. On the main Valorian ship, Zixlath received more bad news. The ground forces were meeting heavy resistance. Several ships had been shot down by human weapons. And worst of all, the humans were beginning to study Valorian technology. We must increase our attacks, Zixlath ordered. Use the energy weapons on their military bases. We need to show them our power. But many of the younger Valorians were uncertain. They had never fought a war without their mind control technology. They had never faced a species that could truly fight back. Sir, one officer said hesitantly, perhaps we should try to communicate with them, find out why they're different from other species? Zixlath glared at the officer. They are resources to be used, just like all the others. The fact that they resist only means we must try harder to control them. Back at the Colorado base, Olivia made another important discovery. She had been studying the brain patterns of the captured Valorians and comparing them to human brains. Look at this, she said to Greg and Frank. Their brains are almost identical to each other. The patterns match perfectly. But human brains, everyone is unique. Greg looked at the brain scans. So their mind control needs everyone to think the same way? Exactly, Olivia said. And humans never think exactly the same way. We're too individual, too chaotic in our thoughts. As night fell on the second day of the invasion, an idea was forming. If humans couldn't be controlled by the Valorian beam because their minds were too individual and chaotic, could the Valorians themselves be affected if the beam was changed to match their united mind pattern? Paul Martinez worked through the night on the captured CCR device, trying to reverse its effects. If he could make it work on Valorians instead of other species, they might have a weapon that could end the invasion. And somewhere in space, other alien species watched with interest. The species that had been controlled by the Valorians for generations were seeing something new, a species that could resist. A species that fought back. A species whose minds were their own. Humans. 2 weeks after the mission to the Valorian mothership, Earth was still coming to terms with what had happened. The Valorian ships remained in orbit, but they no longer posed a threat. Instead, something unexpected was happening. Communication. Indiri. A large conference room at the United Nations. Humans and Valorians sat across from each other at a long table. On the human side were leaders from major countries along with Diane, Greg, Olivia, and Paul. On the Valorian side was Commander Zixlath, now calling himself simply Zix, along with several other Valorians. We wish to thank you, Zix said, his voice much softer than before. What you did was painful at first, but necessary. For the first time in many generations, we are thinking as individuals. The Secretary General of the UN leaned forward. We're glad to hear that. But we need to understand what happened. Why were you controlling yourselves? And why did you want to control us? Zix looked at his fellow Valorians. They nodded, encouraging him to explain. It began long ago, Zix said. Our species evolved as individual thinkers, much like yours. But over 10,000 years ago, we encountered technology left by an ancient race, beings we call the predecessors. They had vanished, but their machines remained. One of these machines was the original cerebral compliance ray. He paused, looking troubled. Our ancestors found they could use it to make their society more efficient. to end conflicts, to create perfect order. At first it was used sparingly, but over generations it became our way of life. The central control grew stronger. Individual thought became rare. So you were controlling yourselves? Olivia asked. Not just other species? Yes, Zix admitted, though we didn't realize it. The control was so complete, so perfect that we thought our unified mind was natural. We believed we were making decisions together, when in fact, we were all following programming left by the predecessors. And the conquest of other worlds? Greg asked. Was that part of the programming too? Zix nodded. The predecessor machines contained specific instructions: expand, conquer, assimilate. We never questioned why. We simply obeyed, believing the thoughts were our own. This revelation shocked the humans. The Valorians hadn't been evil conquerors. They had been puppets, following ancient instructions embedded in their technology. So what happens now? Diane asked. Will you return to your old ways? No, Zix said firmly. We cannot. The modified CCR you created did more than temporarily disrupt our group mind. It permanently altered the control patterns. We can never return to full collective consciousness. Is that okay with your people? Paul asked. A female Valorian spoke up. It is difficult. Many of us feel lost without the constant connection to others. It's like suddenly being blind or deaf after having perfect senses. But we are also discovering the joy of having our own thoughts, our own feelings. It is both terrifying and wonderful. Over the next few days, humans and Valorians continued to talk. Scientists from both species studied the CCR technology together, trying to understand how it worked and why humans were immune to its effects. In a lab at MIT, Olivia was working with a Valorian scientist named Morel. They were comparing human and Valorian brain scans side by side. Your theory was correct, Morel said, her four-fingered hand pointing to the screen. Human brains are remarkably chaotic. Your neural pathways form and reform constantly. You can hold contradictory thoughts simultaneously. You can believe one thing while feeling another, Olivia nodded. And Valorian brains? Structured, logical, consistent, Morel replied. The perfect target for the CCR. It needs patterns it can lock onto and modify. Human brains simply have too many patterns changing too quickly. But there's something else, Olivia said, showing Morel another scan. Look at this human brain activity when exposed to the CCR. It's not just that we resist it. Our brains actively fight against it. It's like an immune response. Morel studied the scan with interest. Fascinating. Your species has a natural defense against mental manipulation. I wonder why. Maybe because we've spent our entire history manipulating each other, Olivia suggested. Convincing, arguing, persuading, deceiving. Humans do these things constantly. Maybe we evolved mental defenses because we needed them against each other. In New York, similar conversations were happening between Diane and Zix as they walked through Central Park. People still stared at the 1 week had passed since the Valorians arrived on Earth. Fighting continued around the world. The aliens had better weapons, but humans had the home field advantage. They knew the terrain and had the will to protect their planet. Commander Zixalath looked at the reports from his ground forces. The news wasn't good. Valorian troops had taken over some small towns, but major cities remained under human control. Every time the Valorians tried to advance, humans would retreat, regroup, and attack again. They never gave up. These humans are more trouble than they're worth, Zixalath said to his officers. Perhaps we should just destroy their major cities from orbit and be done with it. His second-in-command looked worried. Sir, that would damage the planet's resources. The Council ordered us to capture Earth intact. Zixalath knew this was true. The Valorian Council, which ruled their entire empire, wanted Earth's water, minerals, and biological diversity. Destroying cities would pollute the air and water, making the planet less valuable. Then what do you suggest? Zixalath asked angrily. We could try to negotiate with them, the officer said. Offer them some autonomy in exchange for access to their resources. Zixalath laughed bitterly. Negotiate? With a primitive species? We have never needed to negotiate before. We take what we want. On Earth, the leaders of major nations had formed a united front against the Valorians. For the first time in history, countries that had been enemies were now working together. They shared military resources, scientific knowledge, and intelligence about Valorian movements. At the Colorado base, now called Resistance HQ, Diane Miller, Greg Dawson, Olivia Murphy, and Paul Martinez met with military leaders to discuss their plan. Paul has made significant progress with the Valorian technology, Diane explained. He believes he can reverse the CCR to affect Valorians instead of other species. Paul nodded. Their mind control works by creating a pattern that matches the target's brainwaves, then gradually changing that pattern to match Valorian commands. I've been able to reverse the process. In theory, we could disrupt the Valorian group mind. General. William Howard, a tall man with gray hair, looked skeptical. In theory? We need more than theories, son. We've tested it on the captured Valorians, Olivia added. When exposed to the modified beam, they become confused and disoriented. Their connection to each other breaks down. Greg Dawson leaned forward. I propose a mission to the main Valorian ship. A small team using a captured Valorian scout ship. We infiltrate, plant the modified CCR device near their central control system, and activate it. The room was quiet as everyone considered this plan. It was risky, but if it worked, they could disable the entire Valorian fleet at once. Who would go on this mission? General Howard asked. I would lead the team, Greg said. We'd need Paul to handle the technical aspects of the CCR device, and Dr. Murphy to monitor its effects on the Valorians. Olivia looked surprised. Me? Go into space? Greg nodded. You understand Valorian brain patterns better than anyone. We need you to confirm that the device is working properly. Diane spoke up. I should go too. I've studied their ship designs from our satellite images. I might be able to help navigate once we're inside. General Howard didn't like it, but he had to admit it was their best option. Fine. You have 48 hours to prepare. After that, we launch the mission. The team began training immediately. Greg taught Olivia and Paul basic combat techniques. Diane studied Valorian ship layouts and tried to identify the best entry points. Paul continued to refine the modified CCR device, making it smaller and more powerful. On the morning of the mission, the four of them stood looking at the captured Valorian scout ship. It was sleek and silver, with strange blue lights pulsing along its sides. It's smaller than I expected, Diane said. That's good, Greg replied. Smaller means less noticeable when we approach the mothership. They boarded the alien craft. Paul had figured out the controls by studying the ships that had been shot down. It wasn't easy, but he could fly it well enough to get them to the main Valorian vessel. Everyone ready? Greg asked. The others nodded, nervous but determined. The scout ship lifted off from the hidden base. Paul guided it upward, towards the massive Valorian mothership hanging above New York City. As they rose through the clouds, the true size of the alien vessel became clear. It was huge, at least a mile long, with hundreds of smaller craft coming and going from its docking bays. How do we get in without them noticing us? Olivia asked. Greg pointed to one of the busy docking areas. We blend in. They have dozens of scout ships just like this one constantly returning from the surface. We'll look like just another ship coming home. Paul guided their small craft toward a busy docking bay. He matched the speed and approach pattern of the other Valorian ships. No one challenged them as they slipped into the massive hangar and landed among identical scout ships. So far, so good, Diane whispered, though there was no need to whisper. Yet, they waited until no Valorians were nearby, then cautiously exited their ship. Greg led the way, moving confidently as if he belonged there. The others followed close behind. Paul carried the modified CCR device in a Valorian equipment case. The inside of the mothership was vast and cold. The corridors were lit with the same blue light they had seen on the scout ship. Strange symbols covered the walls, probably Valorian writing. They passed several Valorians who gave them curious looks, but didn't stop them. They can see we're human, Olivia said quietly. Why aren't they attacking us? They're confused, Greg replied. We're acting like we belong here. In their orderly minds, that doesn't compute. They're not used to unexpected situations. Diane consulted the rough map she had created. We need to go 3 levels up to reach the central control area. That's where the main CCR generator should be. They found a lift of some kind, a platform that moved up through the ship. As they rose, they could see more of the Valorian vessel. It was like a small city inside, with thousands of aliens moving about their tasks. Remember, Paul said, once we activate the device, we'll have to get back to our ship quickly. The effect should spread throughout the mothership, but we don't know how the Valorians will react. They reached the upper level and stepped off the platform. This area was different. Fewer Valorians, more security doors, and strange humming sounds coming from somewhere ahead. That sound might be the CCR generator, Paul said. It creates a very specific frequency. They moved cautiously toward the sound. Suddenly, a door slid open and 3 Valorian guards stepped out. They saw the humans immediately and raised their weapons. Run! Greg shouted. They sprinted down a side corridor as energy blasts hit the wall behind them. Alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Their presence was now known. We need to move faster, Diane said. The control room should be just ahead. They turned a corner and found themselves facing a large door with more Valorian symbols. Paul examined it quickly. This looks like it, he said. But how do we get in? Greg pulled out a small explosive device he had brought from Earth. Stand back. The explosion wasn't large, but it was enough to damage the door mechanism. Greg and Paul forced the door open, and they rushed inside. The control room was circular, with screens showing views of Earth and various parts of the ship. In the center was a glowing pillar of green light, the main CCR generator. Several Valorian operators turned in surprise as the humans entered. Greg and Diane quickly subdued the operators while Paul examined the generator. Olivia kept watch. At the door. How long will it take? Greg asked. Just a few minutes, Paul replied, opening his case and connecting the modified CCR device to the main generator. I need to sync it with their system, then overwrite the control patterns. Olivia called from the door. We've got company coming. Lots of them. Greg and Diane took positions on either side of the door, ready to defend the room. They could hear the sound of many Valorian feet running toward them. Paul, hurry, Greg urged. Almost there, Paul said, his fingers flying over the alien controls. The systems are compatible. Our device is linking up with theirs. The first Valorian guards reached the door. Energy blasts flew into the room. Greg fired back with a Valorian weapon he had taken from one of the operators. Done, Paul shouted. Activating now. He pressed a final control. The green pillar of light pulsed, then changed to a blue color. The effect was immediate. The Valorian guards at the door stopped, firing. They looked confused, dropping their weapons and holding their heads. Olivia watched in fascination. It's working! Their unified mental pattern is breaking down. Throughout the mothership, Valorians stopped whatever they were doing. Some fell to their knees. Others looked around in confusion, as if seeing their surroundings for the first time. The strict order that had always governed Valorian society was collapsing. We need to get back to our ship, Greg said. We don't know how long this effect will last. They made their way back through the ship, passing disoriented Valorians who barely noticed them. When they reached the hangar, they found chaos. Some Valorians were arguing with each other, something that had never happened before. Others were simply sitting, staring into space. They boarded their scout ship and Paul quickly started the engines. No one tried to stop them as they flew out of the hangar and away from the mothership. 6 months passed since the day the Valorian ships first appeared in Earth's skies. The world had changed in ways no one could have imagined. Humans and Valorians worked side by side now. Alien technology was helping solve Earth's biggest problems: hunger, disease, pollution, and energy needs. In a new building called the Galactic Cooperation Center in Geneva, Diane Miller walked through the halls. She looked different now. She stood taller, more confident. She had become Earth's main ambassador to the alien species. Today was an important day. Representatives from all 17 formerly controlled species were meeting for the first time. Nervous? Greg Dawson asked, falling into step beside her. He now led Earth's new space defense force, though these days it was more about exploration than fighting. A little, Diane admitted. Having all these different aliens in one room is historic. I just hope everyone gets along. They entered a large circular room. Around a massive table sat beings of all shapes and sizes. Some had multiple limbs, like the Valorians. Others had no limbs at all. Some breathed air, others water. The only thing they all had in common was that they had once been controlled by the Valorian collective, and now they were free. Zix greeted Diane and Greg at the door. In the past months, he had become a strong ally to Earth. He now led the new Valorian government. The Krell representatives are a bit aggressive, Zix warned quietly. They still hold some anger toward us for controlling them for so long. Please understand if they seem hostile. Diane nodded and took her seat. The meeting began with each species introducing themselves and sharing their experiences since being freed from control. A tall reptilian being called a Krell spoke first. For 300 years, my people served the Valorian collective. We, mined resources, fought wars, built ships, all without choice. When the control broke, many of us wanted revenge. The room was silent, tension thick in the air. But then, the Krell continued, we saw that the Valorians themselves had been controlled, and we saw how humans helped free not just themselves but everyone. This taught us something important. Breaking cycles of control is better than creating new ones through revenge. Relief washed over the room. Other species shared similar stories. Initial anger giving way to understanding and hope for a better future. A small, delicate being with glistening silver skin spoke next. My people, the Melosians, were known for our science and art before the control. We had already begun to rebuild our culture when something unexpected happened. Some of our young ones started showing unusual thought patterns, chaotic, unpredictable patterns similar to human minds. This caught everyone's attention, especially Olivia Murphy's. She had been studying the neurology of different species and their response to the CCR. Are you saying your people are developing human-like thought patterns? Olivia asked. The Melosian nodded. Yes, we believe exposure to the modified CCR did more than break the control. It introduced new neural possibilities. Our scientists have confirmed similar changes in several species. Paul Martinez, who now led Earth's alien technology research team, leaned forward. This could explain something we've been seeing in our studies. The CCR doesn't just control minds, it can shape how they develop over generations. The predecessors used it to make species more controllable, but our version might be doing the opposite. This was a stunning revelation. The modified CCR wasn't just freeing minds. It was changing them, making them more resistant to future control. After the meeting, Diane, Greg, Olivia, and Paul gathered in a small room with Zix and representatives from a few other species. They needed to discuss a more troubling topic, the predecessors. We've been studying their technology for months, Paul said. We know they existed at least 15,000 years ago. They were incredibly advanced. But the question remains, why create technology designed to control other species, and more importantly, are they still out there somewhere? A Krell scientist named Varks had been investigating this question. We found something interesting in an ancient database on one of our worlds. It suggests the predecessors were running from something they feared greatly. What could a species that advanced be afraid of? Greg asked. We don't know, Varks admitted. But they left behind more than just the CCR. They created automated defense systems, observation posts, and what appear to be warning beacons. All lie dormant now, but still functional. Zix looked troubled. It seems the predecessors were preparing for some kind of return or invasion. They may have been using controlled species as a defense force, positioned throughout the galaxy. The implications were disturbing. If the predecessors were preparing for a threat so great that they needed to control entire civilizations as a defense strategy, what exactly were they expecting? There's something else, Olivia said. In my studies of the CCR, I found coding that isn't related to mind control. It looks like a monitoring system, I think the predecessors were watching for something specific, brain patterns unlike any we've cataloged. The room fell silent as everyone considered this. Were the predecessors still out there? Or was there another, even more dangerous species that the predecessors had feared? Whatever the truth, Diane said finally, we're better prepared to face it as free minds working together than as controlled servants. If there is a threat out there, we'll meet it as allies. The others nodded in agreement. Despite the uncertainty, there was a sense of hope in the room. Later that day, in a quiet moment alone, Diane stood by a window looking out at the Swiss mountains. Earth seemed so peaceful from here, but she knew the galaxy was full of unknowns. So much had changed in just 6 months. Humans had gone from being alone in the universe to being part of a growing alliance of species. They had access to technology centuries beyond their own development, and they had learned that their greatest strength was something they had taken for granted, their uniquely chaotic minds. Zix joined her at the window. What are you thinking about, Diane? The future, she replied. Everything's changing so fast. Change can be good, Zix said. My people knew nothing but order and control for thousands of years. Now we're learning to embrace change, to think differently. It's challenging but exciting. Do you ever miss it? Diane asked. The certainty of the collective mind? Zix was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. It was peaceful in its way. No doubts, no conflicts with yourself. But it wasn't real. It wasn't living. Back in America, ordinary people were adjusting to the new reality too. In Kansas, Greg's neighbor Sam was showing some Valorian visitors his farm. They were amazed by the seemingly simple technology of tractors and irrigation systems. You do all this without any mental connection to each other? One young Valorian asked. How do you coordinate? Sam laughed. We talk to each other. We disagree sometimes. We figure things out as we go. It's messy, but it works. This was the lesson that all the formerly controlled species were learning, that progress didn't require perfect order. Sometimes the best ideas came from disagreement, from seeing things differently, from the beautiful chaos of individual minds working together by choice. In schools around the world, children were learning about alien cultures while young Valorians and members of other species were studying Earth history and culture. The exchange of knowledge was happening at an unprecedented rate. In New York, Officer Sam Green, who had watched the Valorian ships appear over Times Square 6 months ago, was now working with a Valorian police officer. They patrolled the streets together, showing people that humans and aliens could cooperate. You know what's funny? Sam said to his partner. 6 months ago, I was terrified of your people. Now my kids want to learn your language. The Valorian, who had chosen the name Ben because it was easier for humans to pronounce, nodded. My own children are obsessed with your human music. They play it constantly. It's chaotic, but pleasing. This was happening everywhere. Different species finding common ground while celebrating their differences. At the Galactic Cooperation Center, the meeting of species concluded with a historic agreement. They would form a new alliance, not based on control like the old Valorian collective, but on mutual respect and cooperation. Each species would contribute their unique strengths. Humans, with their adaptable minds and creativity, would help develop new ways of thinking. Valorians would share their advanced technology. Each species had something valuable to offer. As Diane signed the agreement on behalf of Earth, she thought about how close they had come to a very different outcome. If the Valorian mind control had worked on humans, Earth would now be just another conquered planet. Instead, humanity's unusual minds had not only saved their own freedom, but helped free countless others. The document was called the Free Minds Accord. It promised cooperation among all signatory species and a commitment to protecting mental freedom throughout the galaxy. It also established a research initiative to study the predecessors and prepare for any threats they might have been expecting. That night, there was a celebration. Music from a dozen worlds played while beings of all shapes and sizes talked, laughed, and formed new friendships. Diane watched with satisfaction. Paul joined her, holding a strange blue drink. "Not bad for 6 months' work," he said, "from alien invasion to galactic alliance."